Okay, welcome back to the Jiu Jitsu Mindset. You have me going solo today in terms of moderation. Professor Lucas has recently had his first child and is attending to his duties as a parent. When I had my first one, I remember it being an exhausting experience. Somehow or other, it got less exhausting as I had my second child. And uh, I'm guessing right now he's very well caffeinated. And as our caffeination of choice is Submission Coffee. And if you want to get your subscription, go to the jujitsumindset.com. I think we're kind of coming out of competition season for the last couple of weeks. So those of you heading into more competitions, you should know it still remains unclassified as a performance enhancing drug. The divine has smiled on us week after week. We're getting to talk to extremely interesting people who are not just excellent at what they do, but just have extraordinary depth to character. Today's no exception. Out of habit, I'm going to refer to him by title, and then I'll leave his title. For me as a jiu-jitsu student, I always have to refer to my black belts as professors, but I won't do that throughout the show, Professor Justin Lesko, but forgive me for at least getting one in. So thank you for spending time with us, and I'm grateful you're here.
I'm happy to come on and talk. We were talking a little bit off camera before we started recording, and I'm always looking to talk with people who are a positive influence in jiu-jitsu, and the information and the content you guys put out, I think is a great positive thing for our community. So the fact that we're getting to connect today, I'm very excited about it.
Thank you very much. That's gracious. And the impulse that this is going on a few years now, it's kind of surprising. We're closing in on our 100th episode, which is a nice milestone. And we started with the intention of trying to remove the anxiety for people who had never tried jiu-jitsu to come and get on the mats, give it a shot. And then we worry that too many people quit before they should, where they really get the experience in the fullness of it. And when I was preparing to talk with you and looking at your jiu-jitsu life and your competitive life as a fighter, and you have a large catalog of teaching that's online in addition to obviously all the work you're doing. You seem to be a very passionate human being with a lot of focus, energy, and creativity about how you go about things. So I might want to start counterintuitively to, if you had poured that energy and creativity and focus into something other than the martial arts and jiu-jitsu, what road might you have taken? Where might you have gone?
I don't really know. I think some people really are passionate about a lot of things, and they know what they want to do with their life, and then they run that down, and from childhood that's what their dream is, and that becomes their dream job. And that really wasn't me. When I was in high school, I was very into music. I went to college for music for a little bit, and then
Mhm.
realized this isn't for me, and then changed directions. And when I found jujitsu, I was like working in restaurants. I started to work in a bank. I work in finance now,
Mhm.
so maybe that's where I would have ended up anyway. But when I was working at the bank, I went from fighting as an amateur in MMA to fighting pro MMA, and the two just were not cohesive. I could not work like 45 hours a week in a
Yeah.
bank and also trying to be a pro fighter. And I left that job and focused on my pro MMA career. But I never really loved that job to begin with. I think
Yeah.
fighting MMA was a good excuse for me to not work in banks, in
Right.
retail banking
Yeah.
anymore. So I don't know. I would have continued on that trajectory. I think that finding jujitsu and finding MMA, maybe that was what I was meant to find. If you want to
Sure.
frame it that way, the fate of the universe was for me to find jujitsu. I don't know that I could be so arrogant as to say the universe had a plan just for me to find jujitsu, but
Right.
I think that I'm lucky that I found jujitsu because I
Mhm.
was sort of like drifting. What am I going to do? Where am I going to end up? Getting a little bit long in the tooth for not having an idea of what I wanted to be when I grew up. And
Right.
I found jujitsu. So I think that no matter what I would have found that wasn't jujitsu, I would not have liked it as much as I like jujitsu.
Right.
And I'm lucky that I have a job that I don't mind, that allows me the time and the freedom to do what I do, as my, we'll
Yeah.
call it a side hustle if you want, not my day job, not my full-time job.
Right.
I work from home, which gives me time to create the content that I create. It gives me the time to edit every video and try to put as
Yeah.
much effort and passion as I can into what I'm doing creatively, that I wouldn't have that flexibility if I didn't work from home and a pandemic didn't happen that sent me,
Yeah. Right.
out of the office into my house. So I guess the very long answer to your very short question was, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, that's
Fortunately, I found jujitsu.
and I'm curious, as the young man that you were that transitioned into fighting MMA as what you were doing during that time, there's not that takes such an appetite for focus and discipline and also physical conflict that not many people experience. I mean, we've talked to a lot of people here that, like, if you were in the military or have been in the military, I consider that a unknowable level of physical conflict if you haven't experienced it. You know what I mean? Because everything has such a lethal possibility there. And we've talked to law enforcement. I mean, there seems to be an analogy between law enforcement and the military, but I often think of MMA as on that spectrum of violence that to elect it, like, oh, I want to go towards that, is a personality that also might consider non-adrenaline focused things to be kind of dull. I mean, in
Yeah, for
comparison,
sure.
what I
For
mean,
sure.
did it satisfy? Did it have an arc that you're like, okay, I was able to transition into this other. I know you still compete, and those competitions are different, but um, relative to when you transitioned into being a pro fighter as what you were doing,
Yeah,
what was it like?
I do think standing in a cage or on a stage or on a mat and having a referee raise your hand as a win is
Yeah.
the best high in the world, and it only lasts
Mm.
for that 10 seconds or so,
Right.
and you're constantly chasing that next win, that next
Mhm.
hand raise, and I think that in terms of adrenaline and a high, that's as good as it gets. And for me, competing in jiu-jitsu, doing, super fights, doing sub-only fights, it's not quite the MMA high because the stakes aren't as high,
Mhm.
and it's still great. It's a 8 out of 10 as opposed to
Yeah.
10 out of 10 at MMA, so I will take it.
Right.
But yeah, the physical scratching that physical itch of, I always wanna know, how much can I take? How far can I push? How much can I do? Setting a challenge and trying to accomplish it. And for MMA, I think the training camp and the push to prepare was just as enjoyable for me as the win. And, when
Yeah.
I was training and fighting MMA, and it was my full-time job, and I'm training 6 days a week, I'm doing 2 training sessions a day, and
Right.
and exhausted on Sundays to the point where my now wife is really frustrated that we're not doing anything but sitting on the couch because I'm just completely spent. That's as enjoyable to me as the feeling of winning. So as
Yeah.
much as it takes a willingness to take the abuse, take the damage,
Right.
you have to enjoy that
Yes.
8 or 12-week process leading up to it, because if you're not, it's too difficult to get through without finding a level of enjoyment there.
Right.
So I think that was, I always say that MMA was like my favorite job I've ever had, even though it resulted in hospital trips and injury, black eyes and busted noses, but the the process and the preparation, for me, it was just the best part about it. And that's why I think I still chase some of those challenges where it's, can I ride, 40% of the Tour de France every July? Can I run 1,000 miles in a year? Can I do 2,000 rounds of jujitsu in a year? Setting out challenges for myself that
Right.
I am still competing, and I know that on February, whatever the date is, I have a super fight, and I'll be in training camp for that the day after Christmas, and I'll
Right.
I'll train hard for that. But I think having that long-term goal of what can I take? How much can I push my body through? How far can I take this on
Mhm.
top of the short term? I just want to choke somebody in, 7, 8
Sure.
weeks.
Yeah.
I think that it's good for, I wouldn't say it's good for everyone. I understand that it takes a certain amount of time commitment and craziness to try to destroy your body on purpose to see if you can tolerate it. But for
Right.
me, it satisfies what I'm missing now that I'm not actually fighting and putting my body through that in preparation for a fight.
Right. And I mean, when I think about things that translate off the mats, I mean, your level of competition is a level of competition most of us are not going to participate in, be able to achieve. I mean, it's just, you're in rarefied air. However, what you're describing to me is some of the things that happen even for the 54-year-old purple belt like myself. Like it's the capacity to delay gratification, the capacity to focus your physical efforts and the capacity to kind of just endure. I mean, those are all things that are universally valuable on the mats or off the mats. I'm curious about as you went in, particularly early on, was skill acquisition easy for you? Did jujitsu, were you a hand in glove fit for it and just like, "Oh, my body understands how to move here," or was it something that was like a brick by brick process that you had to teach yourself, um, from the beginning? Like, "Okay, nope, I'm not used to moving this way, and so now I gotta learn it."
I think it was a little bit of both. I
Okay.
think that I did take well to jujitsu. I think that it's hard to say like I naturally was good at it because no one is good at it as a white belt. Unless your name is Gordon Ryan, you're not good at it as a white belt, right? So
Right.
in terms of learning, I feel like I took to it very well. I think coming from a musical background and that
That's interesting.
I think that pattern recognition, that
Yeah, yeah,
ability to see how things happen and lay out and can kind of see that pattern,
right.
I think that was a good skill to have coming in. I've always played sports, I was always very active and I
Mhm.
consider myself to be a very athletic person. And part of as I'm getting older, I'm 37 now, and I joke with my brother all the time. My goal is to, if we're all going to diminish as we get older, if our athleticism is going to taper off, if I can maintain as much athleticism as possible and everyone else's
Yeah,
tapers, that
right.
gap widens between my athleticism and my opponent. So I've
That's
I've
right, that's right,
I
yeah.
I focus a lot now on maintaining that athleticism and maintaining my body and all that. But go back 15 years,
Right.
I feel like I did understand, okay, we're moving our hips this way to do this, to do
Yeah.
this. So I did take on that technique. I don't say easily, but it was something I felt came natural to
Yeah.
me. Still got smashed every day by everyone, because that's how it is in jiu-jitsu. But also, I think it's hard for me to say whether I would consider myself like really naturally good at it because when I started training jujitsu, I was training every day. I was
Sure.
training as much as possible. And it was about 6 months into jujitsu that I knew I wanted to have an MMA fight. So that led me to train even farther and harder. And then I had my first amateur MMA fight about a year into jujitsu.
Okay.
And
Wow.
then yeah, I was still a white belt. I got my blue belt after I
Wow.
won my first amateur MMA fight, and then, just from there, it was the ripple effect of my whole
Yeah.
life changed. I followed MMA. Eventually turned pro, but from the very beginning, I was all in. It
Yeah.
wasn't like I was showing up just once or twice a week and kind of fell
Sure.
into it.
Yeah.
So because I was getting so much mat time and so many reps every day,
Yeah.
it probably would have been a problem if I wasn't picking it up. If I wasn't
It
progressing
makes
faster than other white belts, that would be probably a separate issue.
as a musician, may I ask, like, what was your are you one of those people who plays all instruments? Did you have an instrument in particular? Were you a singer, composer? Like, what was the musical direction you were
So what I'm realizing now is that my first go around is maybe impacting my second. I was a percussionist.
Okay.
I started playing the drums in elementary school, in middle school, in high school.
Yeah.
Percussion then encompasses
Mhm.
playing a snare drum, playing a drum set, playing a marimba, playing a xylophone, playing anything percussion.
Yeah.
So maybe you've just walked me into the discovery that that mixed musical ability led me into mixed martial arts, and it's not something I've realized in the last 20 years.
Well, there you go.
But we've had a breakthrough today
And we
together.
have well, okay. And my opinion about like Professor Lucas, my co-host is a percussionist also. And one of the things that I'm always it's a if I know how hard this would be for me, so when I watch him teaching left and right equally well, I that sort of ability to have all four of your limbs doing different things in syncopation, in rhythm, to me is a gift of the percussionist that's either cultivated or just naturally, that I think speaks very well to jujitsu and martial arts in general. Because
Well, that's something that I have always said to anyone I've always ever trained with. People have a habit of drilling something only on one side, and
sure,
having the mindset of I'm doing it on my right side, but then there's also my wrong side. And I think that's flawed. I think you
yeah,
need to be able to do things from both sides. And there's definitely an element of that from a musical background. Like you said,
right,
being
yeah,
able to have your left hand doing one thing while your right hand is doing something different and then switching the roles.
right,
And I always part of my like jujitsu nerd and weirdo guy thing is in jujitsu, I will pay attention to which side most people like to play half guard, and then I will force them to play the wrong
yeah,
side,
yeah,
assuming they've not drilled it as much. I try to take note which side am I more comfortable on in my half guard, and force myself to play the wrong side. So if I end up there,
yeah,
I'm ready to go. And I think that that level of like nerdiness. I mean, I have my own jujitsu podcast because I'm a nerd about jujitsu, but that level of like practical nerdiness,
right.
I think is what suits me for this sport. My nerdiness lines up with jujitsu
Yeah, yeah,
nerdiness
yeah,
that it
right,
takes
right.
to be good.
Yeah, and I find that like music, dancing, actually chess in my mind also are things that are like because linkages in chess. I mean, chess is a lot of pattern recognition that I think has a we that metaphor is thrown around a lot, like physical chess. Um, yeah, I think that's fascinating. And for someone who's 17 years older, I think drilling both sides and be able to move equally well. When I look at my physicality at this juncture in my life versus my physicality as a college athlete many years ago, my inability to have my joints express themselves is I mean, is the most irritating part of the whole thing. Like I just cannot lift my arms above my head, and it's about the structure of my bones now. I've changed the shape of my bones for years of using them, and my choice is to either act differently or replace, certain joints, and I'll do that later in life when technology
Eventually,
eventually.
eventually.
Yeah. So when we take a look at like your competitive life, I have a couple of questions about that. But let me just ask like the most basic of questions, which is how do you see competition as a tool to develop the the hobbyist, the person who's they found jujitsu, they love it, it fits into their life as something they do a couple of times a week, and they would love to be there more, but life is what it is. Do you feel like competition is something that is valuable to everybody, or is it better suited to the few?
I think competition can be valuable to everyone, but I also think that you don't need to compete to be good at jujitsu.
Hmm.
I think that competing can make you better at jujitsu. Competition can help your jujitsu. Competition is tons of fun for me and
Right.
maybe not for others. I recognize the difference in people.
Hmm.
Um, I've been fortunate that I've never trained at a school where it was you have to compete. If you want a blue belt, you have to
Yeah.
win at white belt. If you want a purple belt, you have to win at blue belt because it's just not for everyone. And some of the best people I've ever trained with, some of the best jujitsu I've ever rolled against are people who just don't want to compete
Right.
and don't enjoy competing. And I think, you know, like for us, jujitsu is more than just a hobby, right?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
jujitsu, we don't do these shows because it's just a hobby for
Right.
us, right?
Yes.
So for me, competing is what jujitsu is. That's what I like most about jujitsu is the ability to compete, go out there and test yourself and have a fight where no one's going to get hurt.
Right.
Hopefully,
Right. Yeah.
it's like, so the last like match that I did, the last super fight that I did, before we do our walkout, I'm in the back joking with the guy I'm about to try and strangle. And then we go out there and go at it. And then
Yes.
on the way back, we're joking on the way back. Like
Yes.
that's the most fun part about competing for me. But I can also recognize that the person who's training 2 or 3 times a week because they like it and it's good exercise, they don't want to compete. So they shouldn't be forced to
Yeah.
do
Right.
that.
Right. Yeah.
I think that if I think everyone should compete at least once because I think you don't know if you like it or not until you actually try it.
Yeah.
But I also would never fault someone for saying, I just don't want to compete. It's too much. I don't want the anxiety and the stress and I don't like it. Like that's fine too. Because
Yeah. Yeah.
when
Right.
for the people who aren't like us who have, dedicated a large chunk of their life to it, it's just a thing they like to do. I like to play hockey. I play hockey once a week with my brother and my cousin in a rec league, right? If
Right.
someone was to come to me and be like, "Oh, you have to go to tryouts for like the super advanced whatever league." No, I don't. This is just a thing I like to do, right?
Right.
Like this is
Right.
I pay to do this because it's fun. You
Right.
know what I mean? There's a level of serious approach and less serious approach, and I don't think that either of them is better than the other or either is flawed, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense, and I think that um, the 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 primary virtues that come to the bulk of people from jujitsu happens in the relationships and experiences between the people that are on the mats with you, more so um, than the recognition of winning or all the rest of it. For me, part of the competitive experience for somebody that's where I am in my stage of life is self mastery. So when I'm encouraging people, I'm often like, what you're going to pay for is the experience of being anxious uh, for something that has false importance. If you're in your 50s, there's not somebody waiting off the mats to say, listen, okay, we're going to take you and make you a world champion X, Y, and Z. You know,
Right.
as soon as your match is over, the only one who's remembering it is you. So like you're paying for a set of stress that can be positive, and then it's something to overcome. So I like that, and when I observe myself, I am often find myself humorous because I'm like I'm taking this so seriously, but this is not. It's only serious to me. However, you have a lot of competitive experiences, and so and I'm sure you have a lot of memories associated with that. But if I was to put you on the spot and say, which one pops to mind if I say, what's your most memorable fight or role? What comes to mind?
In terms of memorable, I have two answers for you. I
Okay.
have most I have maybe most memorable and I have maybe most significant.
Okay, good.
Um, Most memorable would probably be, if you go to my Instagram at Justin Lesko, you can see the pinned post, but I had surgery on my knee that was like
Mm,
extensive. It was bad. And I was 34, 30, like I was not young.
mhm.
And it was one of those things where it was like, maybe I'm at a bit of a crossroads here of do I keep competing? Can I keep competing? Should I? And all of that self-doubt that comes with it.
Right.
And I took a match, my first match back, and I won in like 30 seconds via heel hook. And it's very memorable to me because it definitely was at a point where I hadn't competed in years. I got hurt in training. So,
Mhm.
my MMA career ended with an injury, and then I was training jujitsu, and then there was COVID, and then both of my kids were born,
Wow.
and I just was not competing for like probably 4 years. I had no competition,
Right.
got hurt in training, and it's like, okay, maybe I'm done. So to come back,
Yes.
win, and it set me back into I can do this. I can still
Yeah.
compete and kind of change my mindset a little bit.
Right.
So that win I think is very memorable for me because it just reset my focus a little bit at a time when I needed to be reset. So that was
Okay.
very memorable for me.
Makes sense.
Most significant would absolutely be my first amateur MMA fight. Like I said, about a year into
Yeah.
jiu-jitsu, I won via rear naked choke. And so at that time, I'd been training jiu-jitsu. My then girlfriend, we were moving back to Florida. I lived in Pennsylvania at the time. We were moving back to Florida, and it was like November was the fight. And like September, October, my coach was like, "Hey, first amateur fight, here you go. We've got you booked, if you want to do it." And at the time for me, it was like, cool, bucket list. I'll fight in a cage one time.
Right.
We'll move back to Florida. I'll start training jiu-jitsu there. Maybe we'll see how it goes, whatever. So I win that fight. The night of the fight, that promoter comes up to me. My coach is like, "Hey, we're doing another event in 1 month in December. I need someone. Can you do it?" I
Right.
was like, "All right, that's fine. I'll take that fight. I'll
Right.
just push back my move like a month." My then girlfriend, goes ahead, moves down, and I'm going to join her in January. And then that second fight, I won in like a minute with a knockout.
Wow.
No, sorry, knocked him down, choked him out. And after that second fight, it was, "Oh, okay, I think I'm good at this.
Right,
Like
right.
I'm gonna ride this out."
Okay.
And never moved back to Florida. I eventually broke up with that girlfriend because I was living in Pennsylvania fighting, and not the agreed upon move back to Orlando, Florida that we had planned
Right.
for like a year, which probably wasn't the nicest thing I've ever done. But if I don't win that first amateur fight, if I don't choke that dude out,
Yeah, that's interesting. Right.
I don't have my current wife. I don't have my 2 kids. I don't have
Yeah.
anything of my life right now. I don't know what my life would have been in Florida. I don't know if I still would have been with my then
Sure.
girlfriend. Who knows? And I can trace all of that back to that one decision
Yeah.
to take that fight when I really easily could have just said, "You know what? I'm moving in like 3 months. Like, thanks for the offer. I'm just gonna pass." Taking that fight and winning that fight. Or if I would have lost, if I would have got knocked out in 30 seconds,
Right. You would have a different
not for
opinion.
me. I'm done
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
this. That was fun. And then I moved too. So like, in terms of significance, I don't think I can put any more significance on
Yeah. That's a
that
life
fight
changing. Yeah.
taking this life.
That's a pivot into, whatever that expression is, this
Yeah.
particular timeline. If we're going to,
Yeah.
this is a simulation. That was your,
Right.
your pivot, right?
Exactly.
So if I ask you sort of maybe to describe what those experience revealed to yourself about yourself that you didn't know, that you probably thought and understood yourself as a resilient, tough person. But I mean, those are particularly the first conversation or the first fight. I mean, that's a level of self-doubt that I imagine you overcame. I mean, having had knee surgery myself, um, I can appreciate the level of anxiety that comes along. Can I trust, what I've used to trusting, and can I move away? So maybe what you learned about yourself, and did they change you? Obviously, the first professional or the first amateur MMA fight kind of reshapes the direction of your life, but did it also have a reshaping of some part of your psychology?
Yeah. I think you're never really quite sure what you can do, right? Like,
Yeah.
I remember that night in this old like warehouse in Philly, and it's just like, what am I doing here? What am I doing
It
here?
must have been a little surreal.
How did I get here, right?
Yeah.
And I remember I won that fight in the 3rd round, so I had plenty of time to think about what was happening, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember the fight starts, and he comes forward, and he hits me and drives me against the cage, and I remember thinking like, "Oh, this is happening. Like, this is what's going on." And I changed the angle. I put him into the cage. I took him down, pounded on him. Same thing in the 2nd round. I hit a takedown. And then in the 3rd round, repeat the process, but I eventually get the back and I get the choke. And I think having that fight gone 3 rounds and having that
Yeah.
time in there, I was able to say to myself, okay, this wasn't a fluke. Like, I was
Right.
better
Yeah.
than someone at this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I didn't get a lucky punch. He didn't
Right.
slip and fall into a choke. Like, it made me realize that like, oh, I can do this. And then that second fight, I drop him. Oh, I'm good at this part of this too. And
Right. Right.
and each fight along the way, it sort of comes with its own lessons, but it's also things that maybe you're not expecting.
Right.
Like I had a fight, my last amateur fight right before I turned pro was for an amateur title. And I remember when people ask me what it's like to fight and what it's like to have to hurt someone and whatever, I
Right.
remember in like the 3rd round going for like from the mount to an armbar and I had it straight and the dude wasn't tapping.
Right.
And I remember consciously, clearly, calmly thinking, "I'm just going to break the arm. The fight will be over. Just break it because then it'll be done." In any other context, that thought is crazy to
Right. Right.
think
Yes.
like, right? Like
Yeah.
to think, just break his arm. Like it's just it's just occupational hazard. I'm just gonna break his arm. Or I had a super fight about a year ago where fortunately I didn't do any structural damage to my knee, but I thought that I did. I was playing rubber guard. I was going for a go-go plata, and I felt a similar pop in my knee. And in the moment, again, calmly and rationally in my head, I'm thinking, well, if it's all torn up, I'll have more flexibility there to further set up the go-go plata. And then the match ends and I'm limping and it's like, why did I think that? Why
Right. Right.
why why did my brain rationalize just use your broken leg to better twist it into position because there's no resistance, right?
Right.
And that's why my wife gets nervous when I compete because we now know, and I now know,
Yeah.
I can separate competition in my life. I can be in that place where my wife will tell you I'm the most competitive person in the world. If we're playing Uno with the kids, like
You gotta.
daddy wants to win. Um, but I can that level of competition and competitiveness, it exists within me that I wouldn't know it was
Yeah.
there if
Right.
I
Right.
didn't have to like, sorry, I'm just gonna break his arm and then I'll win. You know,
Right.
like
Right. Right.
that
Yeah.
wouldn't be revealed to
That's
me.
a yeah, that's a boundary that you would, um, I think self-awareness of it allows hopefully like ability to control too. Like it's when you're unaware of different parts of you, sometimes they get expressed in less healthy ways. And if you're aware of it, then you can see yourself as you head down a road that, well, maybe this isn't the time for it. And you can catch yourself
Right.
at times. I mean, as you, certainly as um, you go along. Well,
I definitely think though that jujitsu and MMA has made me be a better person
yeah,
because I think that I'm very aware that if someone knows you're a fighter, there's a preconceived connotation about the person that you are, and
right,
you're a crazy person. Like, oh, this guy, if we go out to the bar with our friends and everyone's like, oh, Justin's here, gonna probably fight someone. I'm not. Like, I'm not doing that because I don't want to feed into that stereotype, obviously.
right.
Also, once you've been paid to fight, you don't fight for free. Like that's stupid to do. But I think that in the most like cliche martial arts, whatever way, knowing that there's a boundary between competing and just being in your life, I think that's healthy to explore what that boundary is. And like just from a mental health standpoint as well, jujitsu is mental health for me. If I don't get to train for like a week,
Yeah,
I feel that burden on my mental health, and being able to go and train and get beat up and get tapped and push myself, it makes me a better person because I've gotten to get the energy out of my body. You
yeah,
know what I mean?
right. And I think when I think about my experiences having friends that have been, for example, in the special forces and maybe have experienced combat, it's not 100% true. So I don't want to like overly romanticize the notion that they were always the least, the least interested in silly conflict, like bar fight type conflicts.
Right.
That was not true 100% of the time, but a disproportionate amount of the time, some of the people that have been friends of mine that have been in the most violent circumstances that I know about, like personally touch, via our friendship, also were like people who were the least provocable. And whereas some of the people that have been in my life that may have some insecurities along those lines because they may not have been in a physical fight or something, were the most provocable. And in many ways, I think an adult man, as I mean, in a street conflict, everybody's got a puncher's chance, and somebody who's super provocable and unpredictable, it can be really dangerous, in my opinion, just
Well,
due to being unexpected.
I think that people most wanting to fight someone in the street,
Right.
the the aggressor is always a person who needs to prove their toughness,
Right.
right? We do jujitsu, right? We train hard. I know what I can do. I don't need to test it. I don't need to test it against a random drunk guy. Like,
Right, right.
I don't need to prove that test.
Mhm.
And I think that, like, yeah, when people are younger and you're out and whatever, things happen and whatever. But I think the ability to just move on from something is also a skill that I think it's like sort of parallel. It helps your jujitsu, but it also comes from your jujitsu
Yes,
to
right, right.
just like, okay, I'm done with this. We're moving on to the next thing. All right, you just tapped me like 3 times in a 5 minute round. Let's wash it off.
Yeah,
I'm on to the next thing.
on to the next thing.
And I don't need to worry about, man, he's gonna not think that I'm tough. Well, I know what would happen. So like I don't need to test myself with this.
Right.
And I think that part of that just comes with being older and maturing and not being 21 years old and drunk at a bar. Like that, you remove that. That's a big and who's fighting and who's not. But
Right.
the need to find out who's the toughest, I don't have that need anymore. I
Yes,
don't
yes,
have that
sir. Yeah,
need.
yeah, yeah. So, I mean, you talked about jujitsu making you a better person, and in your years of being in the jiu-jitsu community, you've probably seen other people where it's had a positive impact on who they are, and many people have a lot of those stories. And I'm curious if you have one that sticks out in your mind as like, you know what, this person came in, training really mattered to them, and if you got a favorite story along those lines.
I think that we've all seen people who have come to jujitsu either as very out of shape and need to, make some changes. And jujitsu, I think, is the best form of exercise. And people who want to change their life and be healthier, I think jujitsu is the best way to do that. And there's definitely a few in my mind that I can think of people that came in and really were not where they should be in terms of living a long time, and jujitsu changed that for them, and they stuck with it. Um, I think there's a lot of people who I would think of too, who I know came into jujitsu very nervous about jujitsu, because if you've never trained before, walking through the door of a jujitsu school is a very intimidating
I agree.
situation. You don't really know what to expect. You don't know how this school is going to be. Like we talked about, there's preconceived, connotations about
Yeah.
people who fight and train and whatever. And I can think of a few people who definitely came in who we thought were very introverted, but were probably just super nervous to be there,
Yeah.
and have now stuck it out and are purple and brown belts. So I wouldn't say there's any one where it's like, oh, this guy, that's the story. But there's
Right.
there's people who have stuck with it a lot longer than I thought, because it was a positive impact on their health, and
Mhm.
people who stuck with it for a lot longer than I thought because it was a positive impact on their self-confidence,
Yes.
on their ability to put themselves in an uncomfortable position. Because once you realize that you can walk into a jiu-jitsu school and get beat up a lot, because that's what happens,
Right.
and come back for more, that carries over to the rest of your life. When
Without a doubt.
things are happening, you can keep moving and come back for more. And I think that that's something that, outside of all of the physical benefits of training jujitsu, I think that's a lesson that, whether we realize it or not, a lot of people learn via jujitsu.
There's this incredible story we heard from Hobson Mora on our conversation we had with him, where there's a dire medical emergency with his wife as she's giving birth to the twins, and he's describing the level of uh, in my mind, this is like a torturous moment. And he steps outside the room for a second to have a conversation with the doctor. And he's on his way back in to talk to his wife. And he's like, that what I thought in my mind is like, I'm grabbing my gi and I'm in for the next round. And I thought to myself, such a profound moment in this man's life. And jujitsu was there for him to help him kind of gird up his loins, so to speak, to go in and deal with something, you know, super, super, profound and critical, and, could have turned either way. When we watch the kids in our gyms, like um, thing that I am always curious about is the timid ones sometimes raising their level of confidence to see them, feel, more assertive in the world and confident. And then conversely, the ones that come in with a little more of a bully's mentality, to have them tamper down a little bit and find, some folks need to be tamped down a bit, like, hey, and then other people need to be like, no, no, you're more durable and stronger than you think you are. That
I think
balancing
the mat is a great equalizer. It tends to
it
pull in both
in both
directions.
directions, right? Which I will say, one of the real pleasures of this podcast is, people like yourself and a variety of other people who have had extraordinary accomplishments have come with really humble dispositions. Like, I haven't had a circumstance where even the folks that might be the most well known, or famous within the community, so to speak, everybody has taken to our conversations a real humility and sort of an interest in, yeah, I have my journey, but my journey is my journey. It doesn't mean that just because I've experienced these things that the person who's coming on the mats for the first time and their kind of isn't super important too. Well, the people who are going to listen to you and want to follow you, we talked a little bit about Instagram, but you have a podcast and a variety of ways that they can learn about you. Can you tell us where you want them to go?
Yeah, for sure. If you follow me on Instagram, you can follow me at Justin Lesko. Nice and easy. I had Instagram, and then I basically had the mindset of like, I wonder if I could actually like make this something, and it just kind of
Yeah.
snowballed. And I think that that's my like, if you're only gonna do one thing to follow me on Instagram, because that's where I post most of my stuff. I do have a podcast. It's called That Jiu-Jitsu Podcast. It was born out of COVID and being bored, not being able to do jiu-jitsu. So I figured I would talk about jiu-jitsu, and I called it That Jiu-Jitsu Podcast because I noticed I would talk to my wife and I would be like, oh, I was listening to that cycling podcast that I like, or, oh, on that movie podcast, they said,
Yeah.
she
Yeah.
doesn't need to know what the name is. She doesn't care. So if I call it That Jiu-Jitsu Podcast, you can tell your wife, oh, on That Jiu-Jitsu Podcast, and you're actually saying the
Well
name.
done.
So
Yeah. Very
make
good.
make it easier for everyone to remember.
Clever.
Similarly on YouTube, I do post a lot of longer form content. You can follow me there. It's That Jiu-Jitsu Guy, because it's not just a podcast, it's me, the guy.
Uh-huh.
So at Justin Lesko on Instagram, That Jiu-Jitsu Podcast, or like, just like you guys do on your show, I am lucky that famous jiu-jitsu people want to talk to me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I have good conversations with people in jiu-jitsu. I get into MMA as well. That jiu-jitsu guy, I do a lot of long form stuff on YouTube. You can also follow me on TikTok, but that's going away soon, so don't even bother. I don't really use it that much, and
Okay.
it is what it is. You don't have to like it. It's
Well, that's
stupid.
that's a lot of places to go learn about you.
I'm giving you 3 already, and the TikTok is just the copies of the Instagram, so don't even worry
There
about
we
it.
go. Okay. Well, listen, this was a great conversation, and I appreciate, your insights and spending time with us. I encourage everybody listening, to go. The pinned post that you talked about was one of the first things that I came across, and I thought to myself, well, you know, this is someone who understands resilience, has been through, sometimes people only have highs, and the amplitude of having things go up and down, I think, makes an interesting
And
human
that's what
being.
I try to post on my Instagram. Like, everyone knows the rules at my gym. I'm filming content all the time. I'm filming the rounds. If you do something cool, it makes on Instagram too. And that's part of what I don't like about Instagram sometimes is, like you said, you only see the highs. You only
Right,
see the
right.
highlight reel. And I think social media can get negative when people are comparing
Sure.
their
Yeah.
behind the scenes to the highlight reel they're seeing on Instagram. So like today, like a half hour before we jumped on, I posted myself getting tapped by one of my training partners because he hit a cool wrist lock on me that was super annoying. It's like,
Yeah.
that's going to get posted too. And I
Yeah.
think if I could change one thing about Instagram, it would be, for every 3 subs you post on Instagram, you have to post yourself getting submitted one time at least.
I
But
like that. That's to be an interesting ratio. Well, clearly the message is resonating because you got a giant, following of tens and tens of thousands of people, and so people are resonating with that. So cool.
I try to be like you guys and be a positive impact in the jiu-jitsu world. So if I can positively help someone, or someone can just feel happy watching me get wrist
Yeah,
locked, I'm fine with it. As long as everyone is happy and we're making jiu-jitsu a little bit better.
excellent. All right, Justin. Thanks again, and hopefully, maybe you'll come back again. We'll have another conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.